Greetings and welcome to this edition of Faith to Live By. I'm Pam Christian, your host and trusted truth advocate with my efforts to explore current events from a biblical and prophetic perspective with this weekly podcast. One of my favorite people in all the world and favorite guest to bring you is Alex Newman. Today you'll hear part one of my interview with him, in which he brings up a matter that should be major world headlines, but the media has been utterly silent about it. This is just another evidence of the media being used by the self-appointed elite wanting all power and control in the world, having ownership of the mainstream media. This provides me even more confirmation that what I'm doing with this weekly podcast is not only greatly needed, but it's guided and directed by God. Knowing I'm partnering with God in revealing truth is the least I can do, considering all God has done for me. Thank you, Heavenly Father. Thank you, Jesus. And thank you, Holy Spirit. Before I bring Alex on, I want to share more about the Greece trip we have planned. I had several of you who wrote to me in the past indicating you wanted to be on the list of those interested in going on our Christian tour of Greece called The Footsteps of Paul. Now, I have emailed each and every one of you, but I've only heard back from 2 of you. If you expressed interest and you haven't received an email from Faith to Live By at PamelaChristianMinistries.com, please check your spam box. We've entered the time of registration, and deadlines and attendance requirements will impact whether or not this trip takes place. I've been working with a highly respected tour company for a trip that will allow us to meet up in Thessaloniki, Greece, where we will spend 2 days, then the next day travel to Kalambaka, Greece. Then following day, we'll be taken to Athens, where we will spend 4 days. So we're talking a total of 7 days on the tour. You will need to arrive in Thessaloniki on the 19th, where we will stay at a 4-star hotel, then plan for your return flight from Greece on the 26th. We want between 20 and 34 people, and the more people who sign up, the less the cost is per person. This means you want to encourage as many of your friends and family to join us as possible. As it stands now, with a minimum number of people, the tour is $2,699 per person double occupancy and $3,599 per person single occupancy. Breakfast is included from the 20th through the 26th, and dinner included on the 19th and the 22nd. To give you as much leisure time as possible, lunch is yours to do as you like, with some afternoons including tour activity and others completely up to you. Registration fees of $300 per person are due at the time of sign-up, and registration is scheduled to close March 31st. Registration fees are refundable if requested by June 15th and are not refundable after that date. Final payment must be made by July 15th. Now, I know you want more details, so I encourage you to visit my webpage called Beyond the Podcast, where you can see additional details of the trip and actually sign up to attend. I hope you don't delay and that you get as many people to join as possible so we can all save money. And as an optional bonus, we are working on the addition of a 4-day cruise of the Greek islands following the ground tour. Use the link in the show notes to visit the Beyond the Podcast page. Now, I want to get right into my interview, part 1, with Alex Newman. Alex Newman, I thank you for being on the program once again. You're always a wealth of information. And just before we got started, we were visiting a little bit, trying to decide what we were going to talk about. And I'm fascinated what you brought up about the United Nations. You know, everybody's talking about U.S. aid and what President Trump is doing, and those are all very newsworthy bits of information. But you brought up something about the United Nations that I think we really ought to unwrap.
Well, thank you, Pam. It's an honor to be here. I appreciate it so much. And yeah, I think this should have been front page news on every newspaper in the entire country. In fact, in the entire world. Should have been headline news on all the networks, and yet not a peep. Not a peep. So you have the UN has what they consider to be their Supreme Court. They call it the International Court of Justice. I call it the International Kangaroo Court of Injustice. But they purport to be the final authority on all matters between sovereign states. So they very much look at themselves as the Supreme Court of the world. And they were asked by the UN General Assembly, which I call the Dictators Club. You know, Kim Jong-un gets the same vote as the United States gets. The mullahs over in Iran get the same vote that the United States gets in this so-called Parliament of Humanity. They requested this case at the ICJ at the end of 2023. The case is actually being brought by a tiny little government that nobody's ever heard of, Vanuatu, and they are arguing that CO2 emissions caused climate change, and therefore they need to be declared illegal, they need to be punished, and we need to pay reparations for those CO2 emissions. And if you look at what these lunatics themselves are saying, they're saying that this is the most important case in the history of the world, that this is going to clarify the obligations of governments with respect to climate change and CO2 emissions. And even recently, Pam, I was at the Pact for the Future UN meeting at UN headquarters just a few months ago. It was in September of 2024. All the governments of the world agreed to the Pact of the Future, which says right in there, we agree to be bound by all the decisions and rulings of the International Court of Justice. So, huge, huge deal. They are very likely going to claim that international law requires governments to suppress economic activity that might lead to CO2. By the way, we exhale CO2.
Right.
And meanwhile, you have Donald Trump literally taking a chainsaw to all of this at the international level, at the federal level. So this is a significant conflict that's taking shape, and I think it's very exciting. I don't know exactly what the World Court will rule, but I know the Biden regime, when they testified, asked for a strong ruling that would target agriculture, transportation, energy, etc. And so it'll be very interesting to see what the ruling says, and it'll be even more interesting to see what Donald Trump does with it.
Absolutely. And at this point, what was once termed conspiracy theories have been proven again and again. And you have been on top of the United Nations for years. What did you make of the withdrawal from the World Health Organization? Because I know the WHO and the United Nations work hand in hand.
Yeah, the WHO is actually a specialized agency of the UN. If you think of the UN as a beast, the WHO is one tentacle on this beast, and Donald Trump just gave it a really nice blow. And so I think I mean, he didn't quite cut it off yet because they're still getting a lot of money from the Chicoms and the Europeans and all the rest of it. So it's still there, but it is wounded very significantly in a way that is going to make it very difficult for the WHO to impose its wickedness on the United States of America, at least for the next 4 years. So that is incredibly encouraging. That's one of many UN agencies that Trump has already removed us from. UNRWA, UN Human Rights Council, this is great as well. I would go one step further than Trump, though. See, maybe Trump is the moderate, reasonable one here. I would say forget your diplomatic immunity. Look what you people did to us during COVID. You played defense for the mass murdering communist Chinese dictatorship. You encouraged policies that resulted in the killing of millions of innocent human beings around the world. You must be held accountable. And that's going to be much more than just losing your nice budget from U.S. taxpayers. That's going to be real accountability, very much including being hauled into a court of law and being forced to answer for these terrible crimes that were committed, not just against Americans, but against people around the world.
Now, when you talk about being hauled into a court of law, you're not talking about being hauled into what the United Nations fancies themselves to be. What are you talking about?
Absolutely not. No, I think they ought to be charged under. We've got a lot of federal laws that would be appropriate for this. We've got a lot of state laws that would be appropriate for this. Dr. Francis Boyle just passed away literally less than 2 weeks ago. One of the top professors of international law in the world. I mean, this is a guy who worked in that area his entire career. He was actually the #1 student in international law at Harvard University back when he was studying international law there at the Harvard College of Law. And what he told me was, he was a key part of writing the UN Biological Weapons Convention. He actually wrote himself the implementing legislation for that convention in the United States. It was passed unanimously by the House and by the Senate, signed into law by George H.W. Bush. And he said that under the definitions in those legal instruments, the COVID injection meets the definition of a bioweapon. Therefore, anybody who is promoting, injecting, forcibly putting that on people should be hauled in to a federal court for criminal violations of this implementing legislation for the UN Biological Weapons Convention. And at the state level, every one of our 50 states has very strong laws punishing and criminalizing murder, especially mass murder, deception, fraud. And I could go on and on and on. I'm sure there are some creative attorneys who could find dozens of statutes that would be applicable here. And what the WHO does, like all the other UN agencies, they say, well, we have diplomatic immunity. You can't touch us. Well, you have diplomatic immunity for doing work in the course of your duties, right? Unless your duties include mass murder and killing people, I'm sorry, but forget your diplomatic immunity. We're going to throw you in jail. So that's me speaking. You know, Donald Trump hasn't gone that far. I hope he will. But I don't think these guys like Fauci, I don't think they ought to be allowed to just sail off into the sunset after what they did, because that sends a clear message, and they will do it again.
Well, I heard just today that the federal funding for the Fauci Museum is being withdrawn.
Good, good. And you know, another good piece of news, there's at least 17 state attorneys general that are right now examining state criminal statutes that they might use against Anthony Fauci. So yeah, Biden might have given him an illegitimate pardon against federal crimes that he has committed, but that doesn't stop South Carolina or Idaho or Florida or Oklahoma or Montana or any of these other states from pressing state criminal charges. And trust me, there's a lot of nexus with a lot of these states. So if I was Anthony Fauci, I'd be pretty concerned right now. He should be pretty concerned right now after what he did to us. And we've got to keep praying for this because, God instituted civil government for the purpose of punishing evildoers. If these people aren't evildoers, I don't know what is. So if government's going to fulfill its divine mandate, it must be going after these people who've unleashed these horrors against us.
Absolutely. And I know prophetically, it was another area that I really lean on in getting information to my audience. And God has been saying a lot prophetically about what he is doing to make sure justice is served and his glory will be seen. Now, I want to get back to something because at the end of World War II, there really was such a thing as an international law and people being held responsible for the crimes against humanity. Can you help us understand how that fits into what we're talking about today?
Sure. So after World War II, they put together the Nuremberg tribunals where they put some of these Nazis on trial. And I think there was good and bad with the Nuremberg tribunals. One of my big problems with the Nuremberg tribunals is that they abandoned centuries worth of Anglo-Saxon jurisprudence on things like the presumption of innocence and juries and things like this. So I have some quibbles with the manner in which they were conducted. But I think what was important about the Nuremberg trials was it established a clear precedent that even if you are a government official and even if you are following orders, that is not a valid excuse for perpetrating horrific crimes against humanity. I think a modified version of the Nuremberg trial should have been put together after the fall of the Soviet Union. The fact that it wasn't is very telling. Why were all these mass murderers who had the blood of millions of people allowed to not just walk scot-free, but reinvent themselves as businessman and leader of socialist party? They should have all been thrown in jail if we were feeling very generous after, of course, a proper trial where they'd be given the opportunity to present evidence in their defense, summon witnesses, things like this. So I think one of the big takeaways and there's a lot of big takeaways from Nuremberg. Informed consent, of course, was a huge part of that, right? Some of the experiments that the National Socialists did in those concentration camps. Oh, we're just doing science. No. You need informed consent before you do an experiment on an unwilling human subject. So that has got to be punished. And also, I think one of the really significant doctrines that came out of that is that we will not accept the idea that you can just say you were following orders and then get away scot-free for things. God gave you a brain. You have individual accountability. And this has been accepted in the United States for our entire history. A subordinate officer actually has not just the right to disobey an unconstitutional order, but a duty to do so. And that applies in every sphere of life. If you're working for, a federal health agency and you're given an unconstitutional order, yes, it's not the military, but you still have an obligation to say, hey, that's unconstitutional. I'm not doing it. And we need to remember that and bring that back to the fore so that we don't have atrocities like this happen again.
You brought up a really good point. The people after World War II who were found guilty but were allowed to go back into society, they essentially committed treason. And in America, if a public servant commits treason, they cannot go back into public office. So that's something that I think we really ought to highlight at this time.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there were some other big problems with Nuremberg, too, in that a lot of the criminals completely escaped justice. Some of them went to South America. Some of them were brought to the United States by the U.S. government, by the Central Intelligence Agency under Operation Paperclip. And really, when you have been involved in crimes on the level of what we saw under National Socialism, you should not be walking around a free man. You should not be brought to the United States to work on some secret project just because you're smart. Frankly, you have shown that you cannot be trusted, and you have forfeited your rights, your right to freedom, etc., by depriving others of those rights. And we really do need to go back to accountability. What happens, and we've seen this so clearly over decades now in the United States, what happens when you allow criminals to get away with these kinds of crimes is it emboldens them and it encourages more crime. When you punish it, and that's one of the reasons God instituted civil government, to restrain the sinful nature of man. If you don't show people that there's going to be swift and brutal justice for terrible crimes, what you're going to get is more terrible crimes. So God said he instituted civil government to be a terror unto evil. And when the government is not terrorizing evil, but is rather terrorizing decent, honorable people and promoting evil, we've got a huge, huge problem here. And the consequences of that are just too horrific to imagine.
Yeah, and I'm very, very grateful, as we all are, that God is showing up in these days and he's doing something about all of this. Now, going again to the Nuremberg trials and those criminals who are allowed to go back into corporate sector and continue on with their work, can't we trace some of those individuals and their projects to what we've been living through the past 4 years?
Oh, absolutely. There is a very clear line from some of the leaders of the Nazi Party right back to some of what's going on today. And frankly, Pam, this was true the other way too, right? A lot of people don't realize there's a very significant book that I would recommend to people. It was by one of America's greatest historians, Anthony Sutton, who was a historian at Stanford University. He did a book called Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler. And what he showed is that even before there was Hitler, there were American eugenicists and American mega bankers and American wackadoodles who believed in the very same thing that the Nazis later implemented. In fact, some of it was being implemented in the United States through forcible sterilization laws and things. So Adolf Hitler was looking at America and saying, wow, those are good ideas. If they can do that there, why can't we do that here? And so when some of these Nazis were punished, why weren't the Americans who were funding them punished? Senator Prescott Bush was actually arrested under the Trading with the Enemy Act. Okay, this was a man who was a director at Union Bank of New York. This was one of the banks that helped finance the Nazis. The Rockefellers were some of the biggest financiers, not just of the Nazi regime and the Nazi war machine, but also of the eugenics movement. And what was incredible is that these same ideas, even after the fall of Nazi Germany, then went into the United Nations. You had people like Kurt Waldheim, Secretary General of the UN. This guy was a high-ranking Nazi. How does a high-ranking Nazi end up running the UN after the UN was ostensibly created to fight Nazism and Imperial Japan? And there are so many other examples of this. You look at the guy who ended up in charge of UNESCO, the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, which is still brainwashing young people today. The first guy who led it, Julian Huxley, was at the same time the president of the British Eugenics Society. Eugenics is the same putrid ideology that was implemented by the Nazis. And so how can this happen? Right? So the Nuremberg trials were good in principle. They were a good idea, but they didn't go nearly far enough. And by ignoring some of the precious concepts that we have in Anglo-Saxon jurisprudence, I think we kind of botched it a little bit. But, we can learn from that experience and hopefully do it better the next time around.
Well, you also mentioned informed consent was one of the positives that came out of the Nuremberg trials, and that was also violated with the COVID-19 debacle.
Absolutely. Not by Donald Trump. I'll remind people, Donald Trump never forced one person to take those shots. It was Joe Biden who forced people to take those shots. It was Joe Biden's administration that forced people to take those shots. And it was governments around the world under the leadership of the WHO. So if it was a crime for the Nazis to experiment and to force people to take untested, unwanted medical treatments, how could it not be a crime to do that in 2020, 2021? And the answer is, of course, it is still a crime. Our laws in the United States recognize that. Laws around the world recognize that. The precedent at Nuremberg was established, and it was very clear. And so there is a very easy route here for prosecuting some of the people that were involved with this. And I think Anthony Fauci, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, Deborah Birx, these are some of the people who ought to be at least brought in for questioning under oath for a deposition, and we can find out who told what to whom, who was giving the orders. God is merciful, and I believe there can be a place for mercy. If you want to cooperate with the investigation and you want to explain who all was involved in this stuff, maybe there could be a possibility of immunity from prosecution. This happens all the time when prosecutors are trying to find out, who is the top dog. You give the lower drug dealers immunity. I think that's a viable possibility. But we can't just say, oh, well, Joe Biden pardoned everybody, so we're just going to move on. No. These things have to be sought out, and these people have to be prosecuted.
I so appreciate all the knowledge Alex has. The United Nations has, as Alex said, many tentacles, including the World Health Organization and the United Nations Relief Works Agency for Palestine, both of which I researched and did several podcasts on in the past. If you want to know more about the corruption in these areas, you'll find several podcasts in my lineup. Alex openly spoke of the COVID-19 jabs being a bioweapon. No one who took the jab did so with informed consent. If you or someone you love needs help with your health because of taking the jab, be sure to see the list of doctors in the permanent show notes. Many are reporting success helping those who took the jab. Also, as Alex mentioned, do your research to be part of a class action lawsuit to help hold these criminal people accountable for their wrongdoing. And the book Alex mentioned by Anthony Sutton, Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, is highlighted for you in the show notes, available for purchase through my Amazon affiliate link. Be sure to return next week to hear part 2 of my interview with Alex Newman and learn how former President Obama sold America out and what President Trump has targeted to truly set nations free from the evil we've been living under for hundreds of years. We need to keep President Trump and his entire family protected with prayers, and we must continue to pray for the exposure of evil wherever it exists, and thank God for administering his justice. Now, I ask you to listen to my closing announcements and to take advantage of the many goods and services I bring you in an effort to at least cover the cost of this podcast. The first announcement is about the Greece trip that we are in the process of finalizing. If you think you want to be part of it, be sure to send the email accordingly. Deadlines for registering are looming. It may seem far off, but most people make plans for a significant vacation about a year in advance. So if you haven't already expressed interest in traveling with us in October 2025, now is the time to do so. We want to have about 30 people total because this size group works best for the specific tour I have in mind. We'll be walking the footsteps of the Apostle Paul. I'm using the time between now and February 2025 to determine if we have enough interest, and the trend indicates we definitely should. We have just about 30 people on the list now, but I'd like to have more because when it comes to the actual day of making a commitment, things could have changed, and I want to be able to have at least 30 actually attend the tour. So if you think you'd like to be part of the Faith to Live By Christian tour with me in Greece during October 2025, now is the time to get your name and number in your party on the list. There's no obligation at this point. You're just expressing your interest. Attendees need to arrange their own air travel to and from the Athens International Airport. To get your name on the list, send an email to faithtoliveby@PamelaChristianMinistries.com with the word Greece in the subject line. In the body of the email, provide your name, contact information, and number of people you expect to be in your party. This will place your name on the interested in attending list, but does not obligate you in any way. It merely assures you have first right of refusal come February 2025 when down payments are due. If you didn't get the details written down that I just shared, simply visit my Beyond the Podcast page using the link in the show notes. If you like what you hear from me with this podcast, I highly recommend my book series, my award-winning blog, and consider signing up for my certificate course in apologetics. My aim with that course is to help people learn how not only to use apologetics to share truth with others, but to help Christian leaders incorporate apologetics into their respective ministries so more Christians are learning how to share their faith. You can learn more by using the link in the show notes. For now, I offer my weekly podcasts, my blog, and bi-monthly e-newsletter at no cost. And certainly I have hard costs associated with doing all I do. If you've been blessed by my work and would like to help my work reach others, why not consider partnering with me? For as little as $10 a month, you can become a partner. Then together we can reach even more people for Jesus. Simply visit my Pamela Christian Ministries homepage and then click on the Give button at the top menu bar. Or if you prefer, you can go directly to the Give page using the link in the show notes. To become a partner, you can use my PayPal or Venmo account, but you will also see other ways you can support my work on that page. Whether you choose to become a monthly partner, give a one-time donation, purchase my books and products from my web store, or support my affiliate sponsors, anything you can do to help me continue this work would be greatly appreciated. And as always, your prayers and telling others about me and my ministry work is much needed. When it comes to my selection of affiliate sponsors, I first look for Christian-owned and operated businesses, and I make a point of personally using the products or services so I can fully endorse them. I seek sponsors that offer products or services you can get via the internet worldwide, and I specifically consider what is common to most people universally. So you'll find health, beauty, and wellness products through Dr. Zelenko's Z-Stack supplements and from Operation Tomahawk and from QE Strong. Dr. Zelenko's Z-Stack supplements are truly amazing and are available to my listeners for a 5% discount per purchase or a 10% discount for a monthly subscription using the promo code FTLB. Operation Tomahawk is a membership purchase program with an American-owned and operated company offering personal and household care products that are not made of toxins or genetically modified ingredients. Stop buying national brands from corporations that are part of the deep state cabal. Use the link in the show notes, and from the drop-down menu under How Did You Hear About Us, select Pamela Christian, Faith to Live By. You may have heard my interview with Rob Renee about QE Strong. Discover the benefits of quantum energy to overcome all sorts of ailments. Visit QEstrong.com and use the promo code FTLB at checkout to receive your discount. Then, my newest affiliate I'm really excited to bring you is Q Streaming. That's CUE Streaming Television. People with United States addresses can get over 3,000 channels, including live TV with streaming television without a contract. Get all of your local networks and favorite movie and sports and pay-per-view channels for about half of what cable costs. See the video promo link in the show notes to learn more. Affiliate sponsors only provide financial support to me when you purchase what they offer. So before you support Amazon or any other retailer, if I offer what you're looking for, please purchase through me. When it comes to special occasions, birthdays, or Christmas gifts, consider my books, jewelry, CDs, and more from my web store or any of the affiliate goods and services I offer. When you purchase from my web store, be sure to use the promo code TRUTH, TRUTH, to receive a 20% discount. Again, you'll find all the links in the show notes. If you like the content and resource material I bring you with this podcast, you'll find much more by connecting with me through my blog. In fact, my blog has been awarded 2 unsolicited awards for Christian content. And I'm also very active on social media. I can cover much more on social media than I can with this weekly podcast. And if you're not already subscribed, please subscribe to my complimentary bi-monthly e-newsletter. I offer encouragement, special offers, and one of my signature recipes with each and every edition. Yep, I'm a foodie and I love to entertain, which is why Faith, Family, Friends, and Food is a bonus segment of my bi-monthly e-newsletter. To receive even more, please be sure to check out my dedicated podcast listeners page, Beyond the Podcast. Here's where we can connect exclusively and you can download complimentary devotionals, resources, and more. On that page, I also ask you to help me learn more about you and what you want by completing the form visible once you scroll down that page. And something that is very easy for you to do and would mean a lot to me is for you to rate, subscribe, or comment on this podcast according to what your preferred listening platform allows. You know how it works. The more likes and subscriptions to this podcast, the more opportunity we have to expand the listening audience. And that means we can reach more people with the gospel message of Jesus while helping people learn how to better apply their Christian faith. I hope you'll join me next week and tell your friends and family to listen right here on Faith to Live By, where we learn how to gain spiritual victory over life's issues. Until next week, I'm Pam Christian, asking you to remember Christ died for us. The least we can do is live for Him.